Every war has two supply chains. One carries shells, drones, and fuel to the front, and it gets filmed, tracked, and struck. The other carries money, metal, and raw materials through banks and ports far from any trench. And it usually stays invisible, because everyone involved prefers it that way. This is the story of the second supply chain, and of the moment a piece of it, sitting quietly in Ireland, was dragged into the light. A refinery on European Union soil, connected to Russian ownership, processing material that, according to an independent investigation, fed aluminum production inside Russia. The same Russia whose missiles and drones are built, in part, from aluminum. This is not a story about one factory. It is a story about a question Europe has avoided for years. Can you arm one side of a war while supplying the other? And how long can that contradiction survive contact with evidence? By the end of this video, you will know how one independent journalist forced that question onto the floor of a parliament, and why a bag of white powder from a refinery might end up cross-checked against missile debris from Ukrainian cities. Begin with the uncomfortable baseline, because without it, the refinery story makes no sense. The European Union is collectively one of Ukraine's largest military backers: weapons, ammunition, funding, training, and at the same time, as is well documented, Europe has continued to purchase Russian fossil fuels years into the full-scale war, sending revenue toward the same state budget that pays for the invasion. Trade did not stop. It rerouted, rebranded, and continued. Inside that contradiction live dozens of smaller arrangements, companies, facilities, and cargo flows that are technically legal, politically embarrassing, and strategically corrosive. The refinery in Ireland was one of them, a facility operating under Russian corporate ownership, linked to Rusal, the aluminum giant, supplying alumina, the refined feedstock, into a chain that ends in Russian aluminum production. Why does aluminum matter militarily? Because aluminum is not a neutral metal in this war. It is airframes and drone components, missile bodies and vehicle parts. A state under sanctions, cut off from many Western industrial inputs, values every reliable source of feedstock it can keep, which means a refinery inside the European Union feeding that chain is not merely a trade curiosity. It is functionally a strategic asset for the Russian defense industrial base, sitting in a country that supports Ukraine. The paper said one thing: legal commerce. The battlefield said another. Enter Kellen Robertson, an Irish independent journalist working outside any major media corporation, without institutional protection, without a legal department, without a newsroom budget. He went to the story physically. He investigated the refinery's operations and ownership links, documented the supply relationship, and then did the part that institutional journalism increasingly avoids. He confronted the officials and business figures connected to the arrangement, on camera, directly. The clips went viral, one, then another, then another. And the mechanism of modern accountability kicked in exactly that order. First, the independent investigation, then the viral pressure, then, only then, the legacy media coverage, and finally the politicians who had avoided the questions finding themselves obliged to answer them. The refinery became, at least within the political sphere, one of the top stories in Ireland. Then came the institutional response, and it is worth being precise about what happened. The European Union was urged to move against the facility, and a parliamentary vote followed. A commission report on Ukraine, an amendment adopted on the floor. In the recording of the session, the amendment passes in seconds. Who is in favor? Adopted. Seconds of procedure, produced by months of one person's work. Those observing the case called it what it might be: the beginning of the end of Russian ownership of that refinery. Nothing is finished. Ownership structures fight back. Appeals happen, and enforcement in the European Union moves at the speed of committees. But a facility that operated in comfortable silence now operates under a spotlight, with sanctions pressure building. In the economics of the shadow supply chain, The spotlight itself is damage. And then there is the detail that elevates this, from politics to forensics. During the investigation, a suggestion emerged, credited notably to a supporter of the work rather than any institution. Obtain a physical sample of the alumina itself. Robertson managed to get one. Why does that matter? Because materials carry signatures. A sample of feedstock from a specific refinery can, in principle, be laboratory matched against fragments of Russian missiles and drones recovered from the battlefield. If the chemistry lines up, the abstract accusation, European material ends up in Russian weapons, becomes a physical, testable, courtroom-grade fact. Think about what that precedent would mean. Not an inference from shipping records, a chemical fingerprint connecting a European industrial site to the debris of weapons that fall on Ukrainian cities. The exact status of that testing remains unconfirmed, but the pattern of the investigation is consistent enough to draw one conclusion already. The era when this trade was deniable is ending. There is a human asymmetry underneath all of this that deserves naming. Ukraine itself cannot lead this fight. Ukrainian officials depend on European governments for weapons, funding, and political backing. A state fighting for survival cannot afford to publicly savage the internal business arrangements of its own arms suppliers. Diplomacy forces silence exactly where honesty is most needed. Which is why the pressure has to come from below. From independent journalists, volunteers, and online communities with no budget line to protect and no alliance to manage. One investigator with a camera did what an allied government could not politically afford to do. Whatever this refinery's final fate, that division of labor, states constrained, individuals unleashed, is one of the quiet structural stories of this entire war. It is also worth pausing on why this particular story traveled when so many sanctions stories die in committee reports. It had faces. It had doorstep confrontations instead of spreadsheets. It had the simple, physical image of white powder leaving a European port and, somewhere down the chain, metal falling back to Earth as weapon fragments. Investigations win or lose on whether an ordinary viewer can hold the whole chain in their head. And this one compressed a continent's contradiction into a single facility, a single vote, and a single sample bag. That is a lesson for every researcher and journalist watching. The shadow supply chain is not defeated by data alone. It is defeated by data that has been turned into a story people cannot unsee. So here is the question for the comments, and it cuts deeper than this one facility. When a democracy's official policy and its actual trade flows contradict each other, who should be responsible for exposing it? Governments, established media, or independent individuals with an internet connection? Your answer defines what accountability looks like for the next decade, not just for this war. Zoom out to the full strategic picture. This war is being fought on more layers than any frontline map shows. Drones interdict trucks on roads near the front. Naval drones close an inland sea to ferries and tankers. Long-range strikes hunt fuel and energy on both sides. And beneath all of it runs the deepest layer, the raw material and money war, fought in registries, ports, and parliaments, where a single adopted amendment can be worth more than a destroyed convoy. The lesson of the refinery case restated plainly. In a networked world, the rear area of a war economy extends into the territory of the countries opposing it. And it is exactly as vulnerable to a determined individual with evidence as a supply truck is to a drone. Sunlight, it turns out, is also a precision munition. Two roads lead forward from here. In one, this case becomes a template, samples tested, ownership unwound, and the dozens of similar arrangements across the European Union hunted down one by one, tightening the material noose on the Russian defense industry. In the other, the vote proves symbolic. The structures reorganize under new paperwork, and the second supply chain flows on, quieter and better hidden than before. Which road Europe takes is not decided by Brussels alone. It is decided by how many people watch, share, and refuse to let the story go quiet. Which future do you consider more likely? Say it below, honestly. If this pulled back a curtain for you, press like right now. On stories like this, visibility literally is the weapon. Share the video with someone who thinks wars are only fought with explosives, and subscribe so the next investigation-driven analysis reaches you the moment it is published. Peaceful skies, and keep asking where the metal comes from.